The next case is Serra v. U.S. Attorney General out of the 11th Circuit. These are the
Mhm.
February cases. I can't not talk about this case when the 11th Circuit issues a decision favorable to asylum seekers. It doesn't happen that often in the 11th Circuit. It doesn't happen that often anywhere, but it doesn't happen that often. It happens like 2 times a year in the 11th. So it's a good one. It starts off with the 11th Circuit saying essentially that Cuba has been persecuting political dissidents for 60 years, which is just a great quote for all Cuban asylum cases. And not just asylum cases. I mean, any Cuban case, really, where hardship is an issue. We get we get bogged down with these cases thinking that they're asylum, but like all the evidence in an asylum case is good for a hardship case too. When the 11th Circuit has said how bad it is for people in Cuba, that's relevant for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
But Mr. Serra was a Cuban dissident. He was labeled I think he was labeled a worm, is what they said. They called him a gusano, which was apparently a Castro word for like counter revolutionaries
Oh,
or
okay.
something like that. But he gets beaten, he gets imprisoned. The standard stuff from a legitimate case. And to summarize it, the 11th Circuit believed that the immigration judge was impermissibly focusing on the incidences, and knocking them down individually rather than considering it in totality. But also, like, he was beaten so bad that he forced out a kidney stone. So that's a pretty bad beating. But it's even better for adverse credibility. And here, the 11th Circuit is really there's only a handful of cases in the 11th, and I'm a partner at a firm that's based in the 11th, even though I'm in San Diego. So I always keep track of the 11th Circuit decisions, like all decisions, but I know the cases for adverse credibility in the 11th. There's like 3 or 4 that you're always going to rely upon, and now this is one, too. The 11th is saying that there are certain inconsistencies that just don't matter for an adverse credibility. The fact that Mr. Serra said he estimated that he traveled through 12 rather than 11 countries is just
Yeah.
doesn't matter. The fact that he said that, you know, that it seems like the kidney stone came out immediately when then he testified that it came out a week later. And when you're relying on the initial transcript that you have with, border officials, which isn't even a transcript, really
Yeah.
explaining and adopting a lot of these standard ways to attack an adverse credibility
Yeah.
finding. And I especially like out of the 11th this quote, and this is about the countries that Mr. Serra passed through. And the 11th says, quote, given that the standard the IJ used to measure his credibility was of approximation, the substantial evidence compels reversal. End quote. But to restate that, if Mr. Serra or your client is in court saying, I believe it was about 11 countries. If I recall, it was about 12 countries. If I recall, the kidney stone came out a couple of days later. If your client is in there doing his best, but is not, being completely identifying completely the fact, I think you're in a better place. I
Mhm.
tell my clients when we're talking about dates and stuff, like unless they are positive, unless they know, right, your son was born on May 5th, 1985. Fair enough. But otherwise, if you're talking about dates, month and year are okay.
Yeah.
I think it's rare that you're going to get an adverse credibility where it's based on the fact that the individual testified about month and year, or, said, I believe that it was about a dozen countries. But if you say it was 12 countries, and then later you say, I believe it was 11 countries, well, then, people jump and they say there's an inconsistency. But here's the 11th saying, if you're approximating the whole time, that's not an inconsistency. That's just
Yeah.
somebody doing their best, and that's not inconsistent. That's not adverse credibility. And so I think that goes to prepping your clients in a certain way, which is quite frankly what people do all the time when preparing clients for depositions or federal court testimony. You never want to give the other side a way to really pin down a
Yeah.
potential inconsistency because people make mistakes. There's no reason to be specific unless you're positive. Or
You know,
rarely is there a reason.
I've had cases at USCIS where they do the interview, but they separate them, and people are like really honest mistakes that any couple in the world makes about like, oh, estimates of what time we went to dinner last night or something like that. And then they'll get denials and they'll come to me with it. I'm like reading it. I'm like, really, you really spent the time to write it out based on this. Like, it's unbelievable. But some of these officers are out of control when it comes to this stuff.
Right. I mean, it's like it's like if the question, "What is your spouse's favorite meal?" The answer is a steak, not a medium rare steak. Like
Yeah,
adding the extra specific stuff only provides grounds for adverse credibility, for
yeah,
inconsistency. That's what people do. That's what bad cross examiners do, is they try to get immaterial inconsistencies and make a mound. What is it? Make a mountain from a molehill, to
exactly.
flip around the phrase.
I do need to make a correction. I said, the BI is like the 10th circuit, and you mentioned Florida's the 11th circuit. I forgot how many circuits we have. I thought ninth was the last one for a second
Oh,
there. So,
no, no, yeah, you actually, so you broke up during that part. No, no, I guess the BIA would be the 12th circuit,
12th
if
circuit.
you're
There we
not
go.
including the DC circuit, maybe the 13th circuit.
13th. Okay, okay. So,
But it's still below everybody. I'm not going to raise the BIA up to the level of circuit.
fair enough.